If you're still setting up shop, still acquiring tools and equipment, or if you're thinking about rearranging or changing the way your shop is set up, you should consider the workflow. And by workflow, I mean, how do the tools relate to each other? How do you move from one tool to the other to work more efficiently? If you have your forge over on one side of the shop and your anvil on the other side of the shop, your workflow is probably not going to be very good. By the time you get from the forge to the anvil, it's going to cool down. It's kind of like the work triangle in a kitchen, except in a shop it's more of a square because it's typically forge, anvil, vise, and some other auxiliary tool on the other side of the square, whether that's a workbench, a fly press, hydraulic press, power hammer, treadle hammer, whatever that might be. And I started thinking about this yesterday. I was working on holdfasts, and I was doing a batch of them, and I thought just for laughs I would take my iPhone and I would set it up and do a video in time-lapse while I made a couple of holdfasts. It does an incredibly fast time-lapse, so about 10 minutes worth of work was condensed down to about 30 seconds, and it's kind of comical to watch and a little bit humorous, but you can see how I relate to all those different tools. I'm moving from forge to the little giant power hammer to the bull hammer, back to the anvil, back to the forge, from the forge back to the anvil, then over to the treadle hammer, then back to the forge, then to the vise, then to the anvil. And I never take more than 2 or 3 steps to go from any one of these tools to the other, and they always lead me back to where I started, more or less. You know, it's not a long line where you're working down a progression and then you got to come all the way back to the start. It's all in a very short pattern. And I'll show you the way my shop is set up here. And then we'll take a look at that little video clip. It's less than a minute, and I think it might show you what I'm talking about as far as workflow goes. By the way, this gives you a little bit of an idea of just the general layout of the shop, if some of you have been wondering and haven't looked at the shop tour. Right here in front of the camera is the vise we do most of our filing and assembly at, and the anvil that sits by my bench. So the camera is pretty much sitting where I sit when we talk most of the time. But this is the main work area of the shop. It's based around the coal forge. And while I work in the gas forge the most, the coal forge is stationary, it's permanent, it's not moving. I can relocate the gas forges if I need to. So it's based on being able to take a bar out of the fire and come straight to the anvil. And I often work with the gas forge sitting on the coal forge so that relationship doesn't change. Right now I have the coal forge, or the gas forge over here, so it's a hair more, but it's still just a long reach and a step backwards to get in and out of the gas forge. And it's there because it's summer, it's hot. I don't like it blowing on me anyways. It's just a little less miserable over there. Plus it leaves the coal forge available if I want to switch back and forth in the day. I don't have to wait for the gas forge to cool down completely to pick it up and move it. It's just already out of the way, and I can just light the coal forge while that's cooling down. So I kind of like it that way. But to go from the forge to the power hammer, that's just 2 steps really. Now maybe a few more steps if by the time I get really set up to work. So that's 3, and then bringing my foot up is sort of a 4th step. And that's really all there is to it. And then frequently I go back to the anvil to straighten something after it's been on the power hammer, and then back to the forge. A very efficient little travel distance here. If I need to go to the vise, it's right here. If I come to the vise and I've got a tool in my hand and I forgot my hammer, it's close enough I can reach over to the anvil from the vise and get my hammer. Very efficient to work that way. Treadle hammer, same thing. Hydraulic press, pretty much the same thing. The bull hammer is a little bit harder to get to, but not much. And generally, if I'm working under the bull hammer, I'm using heavier material, and therefore it doesn't cool down as fast, and the extra step to get there is perfectly fine. Swedge block's about the same as the bull hammer. The fly press is a little less convenient, but you can only put so much stuff back here without it being overly crowded. And I don't have a big turntable to move tools around in a circle to bring the one I want forward. Might be kind of handy though. But that's generally what I mean when I talk about workflow in the shop. There's more that can be considered workflow, but I'm just talking about the flow in the forging area. And the better you can set your shop up, the better off you are. Now I know that doesn't always work, like the fly press is not in the ideal place. Ideally, if I was using it a lot, I'd want it right here. But then again, I want every tool right here. And if you've got a smaller shop, or your shop is already kind of full of tools and you get a new tool, sometimes it's got to go over there somewhere and it's a little less convenient. That's another advantage of the gas forge being on wheels. You can take it where you need it. So if you set up a tool somewhere else, you can kind of move the gas forge, point it that direction, within the length of your hose if it's plumbed like mine is. But if you have it on a tank, all you got to do is move the tank with it. And that also means that I can move my gas forge over here closer to the fly press if I'm going to be working out of the fly press. And if I have to, I can move the swedge block and work from this side of the anvil and have a whole nother workstation located on this side if that's what I'm doing for the day. So that improves my workflow in that situation. I don't do that often. It has to be a lot of work I'm doing under the fly press before I'm going to set up that way. So let's take a look at that little video clip from yesterday and see what I'm really talking about when I talk about the way I relate to forge, anvil, two different power hammers, a treadle hammer, and a vise while I'm working. Well, I hope you found that little 30-second or so clip as fun to watch as I did. I think it really illustrates, though, how convenient it is and how much more efficient it is if you have an organized workspace with the tools all right in a good relationship with each other so that you can work. I know that's not possible for everybody. I know if I get more tools, I'm going to have to change the way that works. That's one reason I probably should never look at more tools, but hey, I can't help myself. Now there's another thing that can go under the heading of workflow, and that's kind of workflow more globally with the way you work. How do you deal with the job from materials coming into the shop to product going out of the shop? And at some point we'll probably look a little bit more in depth on that, but in general, I have my stock rack is outside the shop, so when I bring materials home from the steel supplier, I back the truck up to the rack, I unload, I put it in the rack. It's stored, it's convenient, it's ready to go. When I need those materials, then I bring them into the shop through that first big door that doesn't actually have a door in it, but that's where the chop saw, the shear, and the bandsaw are located, and I can cut the materials to length. If I need to deburr the ends or prepare with a grinder some other way to get ready to work the material, then the grinders are out there. I can deburr the ends, then I can bring them into the shop and bring them into the forging area. From the forging area, then they generally come back this direction to this bench for finishing steps, assembly, that kind of stuff. The one thing that doesn't flow smoothly in that is the grinders are still out there, so if I need to grind, I need to go out there and then come back in here. But in general, I've got the shop broken into areas that do specific tasks, so I'm not doing multiple tasks in the same spot all the time that I get in my own way. Now, oftentimes you need to leave stuff out where you can work with it, and if you need to do multiple tasks in that area, you can't do that. But we'll show that on some project in more detail, and we will follow it through from stock rack to saw to forging area and try to show a broader view of it instead of just focusing on the work. That's one thing that we never really show in most of the videos is the shop view of what is going on. We're generally looking at that little zoomed in view, trying to see the details of the work, and you don't really see how things relate. So I hope this helps show you how things relate and how work can flow in the shop and how that can make you more efficient. I hope that was interesting, and I hope you found it helpful and educational. Give it a thumbs up if you can. Love it if you hit that subscribe button. If you'd like to support the channel financially, there is a link for PayPal down in the description. Also a link for Patreon if you're so inclined. There's no obligation. The content is free and will remain so. A donation is simply that, a donation. In the meantime, I do hope you can get out in your shop, work on something, enjoy your time in the shop, challenge your creativity, but remember to stay safe, wear your safety glasses, and in the hot weather, make sure you stay hydrated. Then we'll see you for the next one.